It is really good to be with y'all today, and I'm also happy to have those of you who tune in with us online. Come on in and join us. My name is Shirley Haugen, and last week we started our new study in the book of Exodus. And today we're going to be covering Exodus chapters 4 through 6. The title of our lesson today is Freedom Promised. And we know that God has promised his people, the Israelites, that he is going to free them from slavery in Egypt. And he is going to bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey. The Israelites are all descendants of the 12 sons of Jacob. And you remember God changed Jacob's name to Israel. So the 12 sons of Jacob are the 12 sons of Israel, where we get our 12 tribes of Israel. And so these Israelites, they are living in Egypt and they are thriving and they are multiplying like rabbits. And so they're doing so well that the Pharaoh is beginning to think that they are going to take over the entire country. And so he is fearful of their dominance and their takeover. So he decides that he's going to put them in forced hard labor. And he went so far as to even order the killing of all the newborn baby Hebrew boys because he wanted to tamp them down and not let them take over. And it was during this time frame that the Pharaoh had ordered the killing of all the baby boys that a special Hebrew baby boy was born. And his mother did not want to take him to the Nile River and drown him the way that she was ordered to do. So instead, she placed him in the watertight basket and she floated the baby down the Nile River. And he was found by the Pharaoh's daughter. And this little boy got to grow up in the royal palace and was raised as the Pharaoh's daughter's son. And so she named him Moses, the Pharaoh's daughter did. And Moses grew up, and when he was older, he began, I think, to feel sorry for the plight of his Hebrew people. And he saw one day an Egyptian soldier beating a Hebrew man, and he got upset. He lost his temper, and he killed the Egyptian soldier. And he was afraid that the Pharaoh was going to find out and was afraid for his life, and rightly so, because the Pharaoh did find out and was going to kill him. So he fled Egypt, he ran off to Midian, and he ended up settling and living in Midian. He got married there, he had a family. He lived there peacefully for 40 years as a shepherd and a family man in the land of Midian. And then one day, while Moses was out tending his sheep in the wilderness, Moses encountered a burning bush. And that burning bush was used by God to speak to Moses. God appeared in this burning bush. And God was calling Moses to return to Egypt and to rescue his people from slavery there. And we know the story. Moses was hesitant. He wasn't sure he was the man for the job. He didn't know if he could lead the people out of Egypt. He was afraid that the people wouldn't believe him. They wouldn't. Who was going to believe that God sent him to do that? And so God reassured Moses. God gave Moses 3 powerful signs to demonstrate his divine authority and be able to convince the Israelites to follow him. And I love that these 3 signs were these 3 things. You probably remember many of these from the movie. We've all seen the movie, right? 1, he was going to be able to turn his staff into a snake. And 2, he could make his hand completely covered with leprosy and make it leprous, white as snow, it said. And then he could heal it right after he made it diseased. He could re-heal it. And then the 3rd miraculous sign that God was giving him the authority to do was to take water from the Nile and turn it into blood. So God gave him the authority to do these 3 miraculous things so that the people there would believe him when he said, hey, God's called me to lead y'all out of here. And he would have some authority behind his words. But in spite of all these miraculous signs that God gives him to go do this job, Moses still had self-doubt. Look at Exodus 4, starting in verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Oh Lord, please send someone else to do it." I love that Moses is just like, I'm not ready for this, God. So in spite of God promising to help Moses speak and promising to give Moses the words to say, Moses still doesn't want to go. "Oh Lord, please send someone else to do it." And you know, when Moses said that, he was more or less saying, "God, I'm not willing to obey you." And then look at what it says starting in verse 14. This is Exodus 4, starting in verse 14. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it." So God is going to send someone to help Moses. You know, it's interesting that God got angry here at Moses. You know, God wasn't angry when Moses first asked God, when he was talking to him in the burning bush. He says, "Who am I?" God didn't get angry then. God was not angry when Moses asked, "Who should I say sent me?" God was okay with that. God was not angry when Moses disbelieved God's word and said, "Suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice." God was not even angry when Moses claimed that he was not eloquent. But God was angry when Moses was just plain unwilling. "Oh Lord, send somebody else." That's when God said, "Okay, Moses, you are going to do this. I'm going to send Aaron to help you." So in spite of God's anger and frustration with Moses, he still showed grace to him because he sent him his brother Aaron, who he had probably never seen for 40 years. I mean, we don't know that they had a chance to visit each other while Moses had been living around Midian. And so he's going to let him reunite with his brother, and he's going to get to work with him in performing this calling of God. And so really he does show Moses grace here. And then in Exodus 4, 27 and 28, it says, "The Lord said to Aaron, 'Go into the wilderness to meet Moses.'" He's saying this to Aaron, of course. "So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. Then Moses told Aaron everything the Lord had sent him to say, and also about all the signs he had commanded him to perform. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped." So Moses and Aaron appear before the Israelites. They see the miracles. They see the staff turn into a serpent. They see these miraculous signs, and they believe that, yes, God has called Moses to rescue us. And they are happy. They bow down and they worship God because they know that God has heard them and he's coming to rescue them. He's sending Moses to lead them out of slavery. And then Keith, would you read for us, read Exodus 5, just verses 1 through 4.
Okay, 5, 1 through 4. "And afterward Moses and Aaron came and said to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness.' But Pharaoh said, 'Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and besides, I will not let Israel go.' Then they said, 'The Lord the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Otherwise, he will fall upon us with pestilence or with a sword.' But the king of Egypt said to them, 'Moses and Aaron, why do you draw the people away from their work? Get back to your labors.'"
And then, go ahead and read verse 5 for me too, right quick.
"Again, Pharaoh said, 'Look, the people of the land are now many. and you would have them cease from their labors?
Thank you. Sorry, I meant to have you read through the 5th verse. So Moses and Aaron, they obeyed God and they went before the Pharaoh. You know, it was one thing for them to go and talk to the Israelites, but then they had to do something very brave. They had to go and appear before Pharaoh and ask Pharaoh to let the people go. And so you have to commend them for their obedience here. You know, the Pharaoh who was over Egypt, he was not a public servant the way we might think of as a public servant who leads our country, right? The entire public there in Egypt lived to serve the Pharaoh, not the other way around. His power and authority were supreme over the land. And there was no constitution or law or governing body, no legislature that was higher or even remotely equal to the Pharaoh. He was the end all and everything over the land of Egypt. And you know, the pharaohs, they were thought to be gods. They were not considered to be mere men. They not only were thought to be gods, they were considered to be the friend to the gods of Egypt, because you know they worshipped many gods there. And the pharaohs even went and sat in the temples to receive worship alongside the other gods. And so there was an inscription, listen to this. There was an inscription by a pharaoh on an ancient Egyptian temple that said this: I am that which was and is and shall be, and no man has lifted my veil. Can you imagine? Is that not just a bit blasphemous? That's the kind of attitude that these pharaohs had.
Well, while you're talking about the power of that Pharaoh, you know, one thing that I love about the story of Moses is that, you know, whenever we think about, does God equip me for what I need to do, I feel like his life is just an example of that. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, obviously God orchestrates everything, but his life is such a picture of that, because nobody could just go appear before Pharaoh. And the fact that he was raised in that house, mm-hmm. it raised as an Egyptian, gave him, so, you know,
him some access.
It gave him, I mean, so like the first 40 years prepared him for everything. You know, I have to really work on my concern about God's timing in my life. And I think Moses always knew that there was some kind of a call on his life. That's why he tried to intervene with
killing the Egyptian soldier.
I don't think he even meant to kill the Egyptian. It just happened. But
his heart was right.
His heart was right.
He wanted to help his people, but he lost his temper.
So his first 40 years was God laying down that foundation for, you're going to need this. You're going to need the language. You're going to need the culture. You're going to need to know all of this, and you're going to need the clout to get back in there. And then the second 40 years of him being a nomadic wanderer in the wilderness, herding sheep, that was really going to be needed when he's herding 1 million people through the wilderness.
That is so true. He had some experience out in the wild.
It also taught him humility, because he was raised in Pharaoh's house.
To have pride and so I love that.
He's seen both sides of the coin.
Well, God used both of those experiences for the last third of his life. And he couldn't have just appeared before Pharaoh without the first 40 years.
I agree. Our verses don't go into that detail, but you have to know that was probably how he was able to get an audience for he and his brother Aaron, is that he had contacts. He knew people there in the royal palace. So he was uniquely prepared to go and appear before the Pharaoh to ask him to do this.
Even though he's arguing with God about his qualifications, God's like, I already equipped you.
God was working behind the scenes to prepare him all along.
All the way.
And so there's this Pharaoh who thinks he's God, and he's arrogant enough to believe that. He thinks he's better than any man. And of course the Egyptians agreed. They worshiped him like a god, right? They were there to serve him. But, you know, like you said, Moses, because he had grown up in the royal courts of Egypt, he knew how the Pharaoh felt about himself. Mm-hmm. He understood all of that. But he also knew that Pharaoh was just a man. He was really just a man. There was nothing special about Pharaoh that made him God. And so Moses confronted Pharaoh with the authority of the true living God. That was one thing he had on his side when he and Aaron appeared before the Pharaoh. And Moses, of course, told the Pharaoh that the Lord, the God of Israel, said, "Let my people go." And then Pharaoh responds by saying in verse 2, he said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." And then I love Moses then goes into a more detailed explanation for the Pharaoh. He said in Exodus 5:3, he says, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword." And the Pharaoh just dismisses Moses and Aaron with that. He's just not having it. It says in 5:4, it says, "Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work." Then Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working." So that's all Pharaoh can think about. Pharaoh has them making bricks, and he wants them building and doing their thing, and he is upset that Moses and Aaron are daring to stop this. He is taking advantage of the Israelites and all their hard labor, and he is not having it. He is not going to let them just go and do their thing. So instead of listening and letting the Israelites go, he decides to make them work even harder. In fact, he thinks that they have too much time on their hands, because that's why they're crying out, "Let us go and sacrifice to our God." He's saying, well, they have way too much time on their hands if they're conjuring up a journey to go make sacrifices to their God, so I better work them even harder. So Pharaoh demanded that they now had to gather their own raw materials, their own straw to make these bricks with, which was going to take a lot more time and effort, but he still left the quotas of how many bricks they had to make the same. So now you have to make the bricks, but we're not just going to bring you the straw to do it with. You're going to have to go and gather your own straw to make the bricks with. And then the Egyptian slave drivers beat the Egyptians for missing their brick quotas. The Egyptian overseers appealed to Pharaoh. They were like, "This is not fair. We've got these unrealistic quotas being placed on our people, and then when we can't make them, you're going to beat us." And they went to the Pharaoh, but he just called them lazy and told them to get back to work. So Pharaoh was not seeing things at all from their perspective. And then it says, as the Egyptian overseers, they were leaving the royal palace, they ran into Moses and Aaron, and they said to them in Exodus, starting in verse 21, "May the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." And can you imagine? Now, when Moses and Aaron first went to their Hebrew people to say, "Hey, God is sending us to rescue you," they were so happy and they were worshiping God. And now they're like, "Why have you done this to us? You've just made our life worse." So they went from being hopeful and excited that they were going to be free to, "What have you done to us? Like, now we hate you, Moses. Now you've just made our life worse."
One is based on pure emotion. The other is based on reality.
Yeah. And the reality was hitting them hard. They were working harder than ever, and they couldn't keep up, and they were being beaten and persecuted as they tried to do their work. But then it says, look in, where was I? I lost my place. 5:22. Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Why, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." I love that Moses feels comfortable enough that he can go to God with this lament. And he does. Keith, will you read for us Exodus 6, verses 1-9?
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for under compulsion he will let them go, and under compulsion he will drive them out of his land." God spoke further to Moses and said to him, "I am the Lord, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name Lord, by the way, that's Yahweh right there. I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they sojourned. Furthermore, I have heard the groaning of the sons of Israel, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Then I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. So Moses spoke thus to the sons of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses on account of their despondency and cruel bondage.
Thank you, Keith. I love these verses. There is so much packed into these few verses. It is full of amazing promises that God has made to his people. There's 10 times in here when God says, I will or I am. And 10 can represent the perfect order of God's plan and how he sets things up for his purposes. It is God's will, and he will make it happen. He says, I will bring you out. I will free you. Pharaoh's not going to do it. Moses isn't going to do it. God is going to do it. God is going to save them and set them free. I will bring you out. I will free you. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will take you as my people. I will be your God. I will bring you to the land. I will give it to you as a possession. And then 4 times in this, God says, I am. Remember last week, God told Moses his name. He says, I am who I am. This is what you say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. This is my name forever. The name you shall call me from generation to generation. So here in chapter 6, God is reminding Moses and his people who he is, the great I am. I appeared, he says, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I established my covenant. I heard the groaning of the Israelites. I have remembered my covenant. And he's reminding them of this. So a lot of these people, even though it's been like 400 years, they remember the stories that are being passed down from their forefathers, from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he is reminding them that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I am going to fulfill my promises that I made to my people. I'm going to fulfill my covenant. And then look at the references to God's mighty hand. In verse 1, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of this country. And then later down in verse 6, there's a reference to God's outstretched arm. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. And so I wanted to talk about God's mighty hand and God's outstretched arm. There's a lot of good symbolism and a lot of good commentaries about that. One of the terms we encounter over and over in Scripture is the arm of the Lord. Usually it is said to be outstretched. It's active in doing something. It's not passive. Sometimes we find the Lord's right hand referred to often in a context. It's equivalent to the arm. The arm and the hand, they're all connected. Many times in scriptures, we read of the Lord's outstretched hand or arm. It serves as a metaphor both for his forbearance and for his invitation to come to him. Because typically you think of the mighty hand and the outstretched arm as like it's coming in judgment, right? And it is. He says here, with mighty acts of judgment. So it has that meaning also. But it's also an invitation to come to God. We find such references scattered throughout Isaiah's writings. His anger is not turned away, but his hand is outstretched still. And then in his prophecies, that hand is sometimes extended in anger and a moment later in mercy, but always in love. There's a sense that God is reaching for us even when we are turning away. His outstretched hand offers us his continuing covenant of peace. His outstretched hand is showing them, I am actively involved in fulfilling my promises, in fulfilling my covenant with you. And I just love the symbolism of that. God's right hand, or God's mighty hand, or his righteous right arm in prophecy many times refers to the Messiah. The Messiah whom is given power and authority to subdue his enemies. And then Matthew 28:18, right before Jesus gives the Great Commission, he says, then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So Jesus is on earth. He is God's right hand. He is God's outstretched arm. And if you think about it, it's the same arms and hands that were outstretched on the cross, nailed to the cross, that reach out to save us. And then go back to verse 1. Because of my mighty hand, he, the Pharaoh, will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of this country. It's because of God's mighty hand that his people will be set free. God is reconfirming to Moses and to the Israelites that things may temporarily have gotten worse for the Israelites, but God's promises still hold true. In verse 6, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. So I love how God is doing this. And this whole thing is a metaphor for how God reaches out to us through Jesus. You know, he's promising the Israelites earthly freedom from slavery. They can't believe it's going to happen because things have gotten worse for them in the short run. But in the long run, he will deliver them. And this is such a big picture of what God does for us through Jesus. He is rescuing us from this evil, oppressive world, from neighbors who harass our children. We are strangers in this world. We have a better place waiting for us. And God is making these promises to us when he reiterates his promises to the Israelites. We have the same kind of promises, except in a way ours are even bigger and better than those, right? Because God's promising them earthly freedom and earthly things, but there is a bigger, greater promise that's behind these earthly promises. I love the phrase, I will be your God and you will be my people. It appears in multiple Bible passages. Listen to this, Jeremiah 7:23. Obey me and I will be your God and you will be my people. Walk in obedience to all I command you, that it may go well with you. And of course this verse, Exodus 6:7. You will be my people and I will be your God. I am the Lord your God, and you will know that I made you free from Egypt. Genesis 17:7. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you, throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And then Jeremiah 30:22. And you shall be my people and I will be your God. And then even Ruth, look at Ruth 1:16 and 17. I love this. Your people shall be my people and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. Leviticus 26:12. I will walk among you and will be your God, and you shall be my people. And then, of course, my favorite is the promise, the future promise that God makes to us. It happens after the second coming of Jesus, from Revelation 21:3. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. So God has his word from start to finish filled with that promise to us that he is our God and we are his people. It's all through our past, our history, and our future as believers. And yeah, they're temporarily frustrated in Egypt because things have gotten bad, but God's promises still hold true. As we learn about these promises, that God's promises to the Israelites in slavery in Egypt, like I said, he is reminding us that there's a better, greater promise to all who follow Jesus. So there's this story of what happens to the people, the Israelites who are enslaved in Egypt. It's a story about us. It's a story about everyone who comes to follow Jesus. And then in verse 8, and I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. And then he kind of signs it. I am the Lord. So he's saying, you're doubting me now. You're doubting me now. You can't believe it's going to happen because our little human brains can't see past now. We get frustrated because things don't happen when we want them to happen. But that doesn't mean God has forgotten about us. It doesn't mean that he's not working in the background to fulfill all of his promises he's made to us. God signs this promise, I am the Lord. He signs it the same way he did when he first promised Moses, I am the Lord, when he spoke to him in the burning bush. And it's like, how cool is this? Could it be any more clear? Could it be any more emphatic? God is going to do this because he is the Lord. This kind of reminds me, these whole verses where God just reiterates over and over his promises to us of what he will do for us and how he is our God. It's better than like an inspirational locker room speech in the middle of a football game when a coach is, trying to fire up the team. So God is reassuring Moses that what I said is going to happen. This set of promises is, yes.
Do you know, is the land he gave them, is that Israel now?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the land he gave them is way bigger than Israel now. But yes.
And they're trying to take what's
Yes.
after that.
Oh, yes. But yeah, if you look at geographically, the land he gave them, the promised land, is way beyond the geographic boundaries of modern day.
They've
Israel.
never inhabited the fullness of what God really has given them.
Yeah.
And they keep taking it from them. I want
Yeah.
to take what's left.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a very good question. Yeah.
An interesting thing about the land, though, about Israel, is just if y'all have time this week and want to look at something. Back in Genesis, when in chapter 49, when Jacob is giving the blessing to the 12 tribes, it's really interesting that the blessings that Jacob gave then, when Joshua takes them into the land of Israel, the land that they get corresponds to the blessings that
He promised,
them
the 12
in the 12.
sons.
It's really interesting because it's just like,
It lines up.
yeah.
Yeah. And so God has outlined this set of promises. And this is truly good news for the Israelites in Egypt that are living in bondage in Egypt. And it's good news for us too, because like I said, these promises he's giving to the Israelites then correspond to the promises he gives us through his son Jesus today. So it was good news for the Israelites then, and it's good news for us today. But then look in verse 9 at how God's people responded. Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. Gosh, y'all, think about that. Don't we get like that? We are so beaten down by this world. We forget where we belong. We forget whose child we are. We forget who has our back because this world just beats us down. The Israelites can't hear or believe. They're too focused on their own suffering and misery. And their centuries of slavery has made them think like slaves instead of people of the covenant of God. Pharaoh was bigger in their eyes than God was. They feared Pharaoh more than they feared God. Many Christians find themselves in this same place.
Shirley, this is exactly why we need so much to just listen to things about God and of God and be in fellowship with other believers and stuff, because just like today, I was listening to a little short podcast that I listened to throughout the week and everything, and it was talking about how at this time of year suicide goes up because people get so despondent and everything, but he said something really wonderful that I thought was just applicable to even me, and it's like, he was talking about the value of our life, and he says, what is the worth of your life? And he said, well, to God, your life is worth him sending Jesus to die on the cross for you. Mm-hmm. That's how much your life is worth. And so I think, we just need to be reminded of that, because the world can get us down when people are bugging our kids, or our kids are bugging us,
yes,
or whatever. Life, friends, people, the world, the news, it can just eat at us to the point where we forget that our very lives have value and worth. And how much worth, we forget. We don't think we're worth anything. So to be reminded that I was worth the creator of the universe sending his holy son to die on the cross for me, that's pretty valuable.
And the fact that he made us to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And the value that we're talking about, we're not valuable because of ourselves.
Mm-mm.
We're valuable because God sees us as being valuable.
And, he created us in his image. Think about that. The God we believe in, the God who created everything that is, he made us in his image. So if we don't value ourselves, we are devaluing God. Mm-hmm. He made us. And if we don't think we're special, that's like spitting in God's face. Because we are made in his image.
Constantly reminded of that, because we can get so
we forget.
down
We forget who we are.
Slavery of the
yes,
world.
that's exactly right. There's a phrase that as Christians sometimes we forget that we are victors through Christ. We are victors and not victims. And the people, the Israelites, they had been in slavery for so long, they were blinded by this victim mentality. Woe is me, I'm a lowly, oppressed slave, and they forgot that they were the people who had a special covenant with God. They forgot who they were in God. They were finding it hard to trust God and believe in those promises that he had made for them. That's why Paul says we must not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12, 1 and 2. The children of Israel needed their minds renewed. And we do too. Like you said, we need it too. It's a long journey of faith. Moses struggled with his faith. He didn't want to go. He was like, Lord, please send somebody else. He didn't want to obey. He didn't want to do it. But God gave him Aaron to help him. He gave him miraculous signs. He gave them the words, just all that stuff. Moses struggled with his faith. The Israelites are struggling with their faith, and we can struggle with faith too. This world beats us all down. That's why it's so important to gather. Josh talks about it. That's why it's so important to gather as believers. We need to remind each other that we are not victims. We are victors. One commentator said this: sometimes we think that it's our faith that activates God's promises in our lives. It's not my faith activating God's promises. Instead, it's God's promises activating our faith. God uses his promises to us to activate our faith. In this story, the Pharaoh, his character is a type. Pharaoh represents a worldly authority that opposes God. He opposes God's plan. We had the serpent in Genesis. And then now in Exodus, we have the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And then later on, we had Herod the Great. He was trying to keep the Messiah from even being born. And he also wanted to kill all the baby boys. Satan wants to oppose us. And he wants to oppose our efforts to follow God. Satan distracts us from our real purpose. And this world is full of distractions. You know, iPhones, social media, materialism, especially Christmas time. I mean, here we are, we're supposed to be celebrating the birth of our Savior. And we all get, even believers, we get so wrapped up in what presents are we going to get for so-and-so. You know, we're distracted and we forget, or we get our hearts hardened toward God. There is a spiritual war that's going on. We're not fighting against flesh and blood. We're fighting against principalities and powers. Pharaoh was the enemy of God's chosen people in Exodus. And Satan, like Pharaoh, he wants to keep us slaves to sin. God promises to set his people free by the power of his mighty hand, the Messiah, Jesus. And God is working behind the scenes diligently to build our faith. God leads us with all these amazing promises that he makes to us in his word. And he's waiting for us to believe and to come to faith in him. You know, our faith can sometimes get distracted and, you know, let's face it, we get distracted by all of our little worldly problems. We think we suffer like the Egyptian slaves did, you know. Sometimes we act like we are physically being oppressed because the world just gets us down. And y'all, sometimes things do get worse before they get better. It's like when you clean out your closet, you know. Sometimes, I don't know why we're running, but you know, when you go to clean out your closet, it looks like a bomb went off, and then finally it gets better, right? But that's life. You know, these promises that God made to us are still true, even when the things of this world temporarily cause all kinds of hurt and suffering. But what God promises will come to pass. His promises are true. His mighty hand will accomplish his plan. And that's really our lesson, our reminder for today. Freedom promised.
One thing I'd like to say is, if you look at the entire history of the people of God, you know, the children of Israel, what we're talking about here is you can look at it as a reflection of how God is with people generally, and that is he met them where they were. They were in bondage. Mm-hmm. And that was all that they could see. He met them with promises of freedom and that sort of thing, if you will, to get their attention, to show that he was their protector and the like. It's only over the next few hundred years, with the prophets in particular, that he is able to explain to them that it's more than just physical things that I'm offering you. And as a matter of fact, the spiritual things are more important. Mm-hmm. But it's going to take a while for them to be able to see that. The same thing with us, as far as him meeting us where we are in our lives, and then revealing to us and helping us to understand better as time goes on what it really means. Mm-hmm. To follow Christ. Yeah. You know, so you see the same thing going on with the children.
The physical is really just a metaphor of the spiritual promises. I mean, it's just a story that we can maybe wrap our human brains around to help us understand the bigger spiritual story that's happening.
And a little joke.
A little joke? Okay. I love a good joke.
You know, you were talking about the strong arm, the strong hand of God. You know, we have the images, you know, of from this time of human action and everything. I saw a cartoon, but God before his computer, and he's sitting there and he's watching somebody, and he has on his keyboard a button that says smite.
I need one of those buttons.
So he can do
smite. Maybe he does have a computer. I don't know. Sure he has.
Anyway, a little edit.
You know, he did in Bruce Almighty. I love that movie. He had a computer. He was answering all the prayer requests. They came in his emails. Sorry, we got beside the point. Anyway, but yeah. Any other comments?
But going into the day in this lesson, I think about the struggles, and I think of them as testing. And his building my strength to persevere and just
he's building our character. And like I said,
if
we didn't experience some suffering, how are we going to appreciate it when we see glory? I mean, the comparison is going to be so stark, you know, and so, yeah, sometimes you have to see a little rain to appreciate the sunshine.
And that's how we know immediately the prosperity gospel is wrong, because God does not promise us those things. He promises us. Yes, there will be pain and suffering, but He will be there with us. Through it.
And you know, the beauty and the grace of God is that He just throws blessings at us here on earth all the time. Let's face it. I mean, we know the world beats us down, but I know every person in this room, if you really looked at your life on this earth, don't the blessings outweigh the hurts?
And sometimes I wonder, why, Lord, have you done that?
Yeah. Why, you know, yeah, He blesses us more than we deserve. Yes.
Well, because I got a really quick little blessing on Friday.
Yes.
I got a
Yeah.
5-second hug to the granddaughter I have not seen.
Yeah.
And that was a God blessing.
It is a blessing.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
Nothing is satisfied, nothing is changed. But I got to hug, and she got to hug me. And
I
see.
love that.
And that was a blessing. Even though everything else is still crazy.
And God does that for
And
us.
that was God.
He
That was
does.
God.
He does.
The timing. He set the timing in motion for me to be there.
I love that.
That's perfect.
I love all the things y'all share in here. Will y'all bow with me and we'll close in prayer.